Um, does anybody have any questions about the cultural profile? I've chatted a little bit, some. Any questions at all about that? Yeah, Val? I really leave it up to you. What I think I said in the syllabus is I don't want one being everything. Like try to keep it at the most 2/3 and 1/3. A lot of students, probably most of them, will just separate them. They'll start with the interview, question, answer, just this typical Q&A format, and then they'll talk more about the country and the cluster, after that. So sometimes the interview ties in to the rest of it more than others, depending on the kinds of things you ask. So that's the idea. I'm not too worried about form and style when it comes to the interview. Just Q&A format is fine as long as it's neat and consistent. Yeah, if that makes sense. But typically the interview, whatever culture, their cluster that person is from is what. And also in that second part, some students, depending on the country, some will spend more time just talking about that country. Others will talk more about the fuller, the cluster. If you want to focus just on that country and its culture, you can. Yesterday we looked at Garrett Hofstede's that website where we could go on and compare, countries with each other and certain. Okay, that's a neat tool. There are so many tools out there. Val, just for example, what country are you doing? Or what your interviewee is from what country? Micronesia. So you can pick a particular part of it, the country there, or if you want to study Micronesia as a cluster, that whole area, you can as well. And there's just so much stuff. You start typing in the name of the country. One of the things to be careful of, if you look at sites that are tourist sites, come visit Micronesia. You might not get a really balanced presentation of the culture because they want to sell you on going. So it's going to be very upbeat and positive, and you can look at them. Encyclopedias on Micronesia, okay? You can type words into search engine like Micronesia culture or Micronesia collectivism, Hofstede's website. If you go into his website and you type in, and we did this yesterday, if you type in the country, I don't know about Micronesia, but if you type in a certain country, then he'll give some information on the 6 cultural dimensions that he himself researched. And he'll give you some information on each of those as it relates to, like if it's Guam or Hawaii or whatever it is, okay? Does that make sense? Other questions about that? The sky's the limit. I'm not expecting peer-reviewed sources for your research because there's just so much out there, and this kind of an assignment doesn't demand peer-reviewed sources so much. It really demands, because there's so much subjectivity out there regarding cultures. I'm not going to hold you to peer-reviewed. And if I said, did I say in the assignment that it had to be peer-reviewed? Yeah, I don't think I did. Just because I want you to have the freedom to look at all sorts of sites. Okay, yeah. If I didn't give you a list in here, I just basically want you to ask the kinds of things you were if you're sitting down with somebody. Hey, what do you think of the food? What the politics here? What do you think about Christians here compared to if you're interviewing a believer? How does the church here look and act differently than the church where you're from? How about the family unit? What have you noticed? What about interaction in society? Are people polite here? Does it look weird the way people greet each other? I mean, the sky's the limit. I didn't give you a certain number of questions you have to ask, but so I want it to be an exercise that'll give you the liberty to investigate. One question that you could ask is, hey, share with me something that stood out to you when you came here. Just leave it open-ended. Something you struggled with. Is there something that surprised you about our culture that that you didn't understand? What was it in chapel? Where did I hear this? was in chapel. Somebody was talking about a Russian gal that came to the States back during the Cold War, and she went into a grocery store and was surprised to find so much food in the shelves. And she went to the manager and said, "So is this kind of like a showcase store or something?" He says, "No, all the stores in here, there was in New York City, all the stores here have this." This wasn't in chapel? Where did I hear this? Just last week. And maybe it was in church. Anyway, and so she didn't believe him. So she started going around to all the different stores and discovered, yeah, they all have their shelves full. And what she came to realize is that when she was growing up in the Soviet Union, she had been taught in school, everybody had been taught that the American situation is just like here. They have bare shelves in their stores just like we do here. And so when she first heard that, she didn't believe it. I mean, just things like that. What is it, something you expected maybe when you came here that wasn't like you thought it was going to be or like you had heard it was going to be? So the sky's the limit on that, Graceland, whatever you want to do. And again, just keep the balance, make sure that there's a fair balance between that and the other research you do. Good, other questions? These are good questions. I want it to be your creation, so I'm trying not to pin you down with a bunch of requirements. Liz? Nope. I mean, if you only ask one or two, maybe a little, But sometimes there's one question that really ends up turning into quite a discussion. So I'm okay. But I mean, if you want an answer, I could say, 4 or 5 questions would be good. Shoot for at least that, maybe. But I'm not going to hold you to it. See how easy I make the assignment for you? All right. If you have other questions, let me know. All right, let's pray and we'll get started. Father, we give you thanks for the beauty of your creation. And we look at geography and we're amazed. And we all anticipate that day when people from every tribe, tongue, and kindred nation will be before the throne of the Lamb. And we get the impression by reading that those cultural distinctions and ethnic and biological distinctions are still there. And yet they're all perfectly united in one body, worshiping the Lamb. And how grateful we are for the privilege of being assured of that from wherever we come from in this world. We are members of the body of Christ, and we know the same Lord and Savior. And I pray you be honored as we look at the South Asian cultures today. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. Now, actually, in your notes, did I have Confucian Asian next? So, okay, my apologies. I'm actually going to switch out of this to the Confucian Asian so I don't confuse you any more than I just did. So give me 1 second. I remember I made a switch one year and I forgot to switch it in on the PowerPoint. So let's go down and take a look at, all right, here's what we're going to do today. Confucian Asian cultures. Let me make sure that okay, good. So, Confucian Asian. Why do we call this the Confucian Asian culture? Because it's dominated by Confucianism? Not necessarily, because it really is based more on the influence that Confucian teaching has had on the culture, but that doesn't mean that Confucianism is going to be the dominant or state religion in any one of these necessarily. And I think that'll become clearer as we talk about it. All right, so here we are. And of course, China is the biggest of these. As you can see, it consumes more of the discussion than any other single country. How big is China? About population-wise? Any guesses? 1.2 billion, something like that. And there is a debate as to whether India has already passed up China. India has been growing and closing the gap for several years. I talked to one pastor in India, and of course, India is not part of this one. It's part of the South Asian one that we'll do next. But one pastor said there are so many tribes in India that aren't even counted in the census that it's possible that India is already past China. But I suppose you could probably say the same thing about China. There are probably tribes, groups in China that have not been counted either, so it's up for grabs. But to suffice it to say that China and India are very close. And look at that. I mean, they actually border on each other, and they're the two largest countries in the world. It's amazing. All right. Okay. Just to work. All right, and there's a closer view. And of course, Lana, Japan falls into this. But if I were to ask you, is Confucianism the main religion in Japan? The answer is Confucianism major religion in Japan? Yeah, Buddhism and Shinto, right? And so again, why do we include? Because there has been influence in Confucian teaching in Japan, but we would not call Confucianism the major religion in Japan, right? North and South Korea also fall into this this group. All right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Confucianism. And today, the objective is not to study Confucianism. We do that in non-Christian religions in the fall semester. Okay, so we're just going to make a few statements. As the name of the cluster suggests, this region is associated with the great Chinese philosopher Confucius. Now let's see, who has had non-Christian religions here? None of you have had that? Okay. Well, we're not going to get into that. Let me see. Let me just say a couple of things since nobody has had it. But we have to keep moving. Confucianism is understood by many people in the world to be not so much a religion as it is a fill in the blank. Yeah, exactly. And the reason they would say it's not so much of a religion is because the emphasis on Confucianism is really pretty much the same as the emphasis of secular humanism in the United States or in the Western world. God isn't even a part of the discussion for most Confucianists. It's a relationship of man to man and how we treat each other and get along in society, okay? We study it as a religion because we even understand secular humanism as a religious persuasion. I mean, if you think of it this way, you have a view on theology in secular humanism, even though you might not acknowledge God, and it's called atheism. But atheism is a theological position, right? So you can't escape it one way or the other. And so just because God is dismissed doesn't mean that it doesn't have religious import. It's just as important to consider the implications of not including God as it is to consider the relationship of man to man, if that makes sense. Okay, fascinating. One of the religions that Confucianism is closely tied to, can you think of another one? We put them together, actually. We study them side by side in non-Christian religions. There's another, not as big, but very, well, Buddhism does have, some common, although Buddhism recognizes a chief leader in the person of Buddha, and Buddhism and Confucianism have both been very popular in China especially. Taoism or Taoism, T or D, the same thing. It's because they come from a little bit different structure of the alphabet, but either one's fine. And Taoism or Taoism is also a religion that pretty much dismisses the idea of God. In fact, the extreme of Taoism is that you don't do anything to make waves. Just go, be and let be. Okay, remember that song from the 60s? Let it be, let it be, let it be. You ever hear that song? I don't know if it was the Beatles or who it was, but so anyway, and the difference between, this is overly simplistic, but if you compare Taoism and Confucianism, Confucianism has always taken more of the involvement in politics, more the active participation in society, trying to affect good change, whereas Taoism says, no, you don't do anything, you just let it go. Just like a river, you don't try to change the path of a river, you just let it go. What's the circle there that's split, what do they call that? In Taoism, it's that, you see it all over the place? Yin Yang. And yin yang is not good, bad, moral, immoral. It's light, dark. They're opposites, but they're all neutral. There's no moral significance if you're a true Taoist. Okay? So they would say it's wrong to take an active role to affect change. Change will happen. If everybody just relaxes and let everything go, then, the balance of the yin yang will happen. The reason that we have imbalance is because people are trying to be proactive. See, and Confucianism says, no, we have a responsibility to help affect change for the better of society. So those two, it's a fascinating study, but we'll get into that more next semester if you happen to take that class. All right, so Confucius. Also closely associated with this cluster is the use of chopsticks. Okay, now Lana, I know you are very good with chopsticks. You're the expert in chopsticks. Who else here is good with chopsticks? You're good with chopsticks. Who else? You good with chopsticks? All right. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I'm not saying you have to be, I've been to Japan 8 or 9 times, and I still can't make the chopsticks work. Anybody bring chopsticks? You got a couple of pens here? Give me a couple of long, yeah, okay. All right. These are really short chopsticks. I've had people tell me different ways to hold chopsticks, and I'm just telling you, if you want to go on a diet, chopsticks is a good way to do it. It takes me 5 minutes to get something that'll hold onto the sticks. So Lana, is there a special way you just learned to use chopsticks naturally, but are there different opinions about how to hold chopsticks? Different ways to hold chopsticks? Oh no, I'm in trouble. Okay. Can you, if these are chopsticks, how would you hold them? Yeah, it looks so easy. Yeah. Oh, you make it look so easy, and no problem for you either. The whole chopsticks, Graceland. Yeah, I try different ways, and I can do this, make them touch. And then I watch people in Japan pick up a bean or rice, a piece of rice, one rice grain. How do you do that? I can't figure it out. So when I go to Japan, of course, they always, for visitors, right, they always put a fork there too, just in case. It's a good thing because I would starve to death if I didn't have a fork. All right, well, thanks for the chopsticks, yeah. Now you know how I collect my pens, don't you? All right, so, chopsticks. Now, why are we talking about chopsticks in a cultural class? Do chopsticks play any role in cultural thinking? So Lana, when you think of the difference between chopsticks and like forks, knives, and spoons, is there any cultural reason that you can think of why chopsticks are used instead of those kinds of things? You just grew up with it, right? It's just what you did. I mean, if somebody asked you, why do you use a fork, knife, and spoon? I would respond, well, because my mom always set the table, or you set the table, And we were taught which side the forks, knives, right? In my house, the fork had to go on the left side, and then the knife, and then the spoon, right, if you're going to do it right. And to this day, I still set it that way. So why chopsticks? Any guesses as to what the utility of or the function of chopsticks might be? Yeah? Yeah. Chopsticks are considered to be a non-violent, eating weapon or utensil. Exactly. So Confucianism is considered to be a peaceful, religion. And so one of the ways of promoting peace is by using utensils that are nonviolent. Now, can you stab somebody with chopstick? Well, sure you can. Maybe some of you have done that before. But they're not associated with, like, you put a nice steak knife by your, that looks lethal. Okay? Not so with chopsticks. So Confucius believed that knives and forks signified aggression. There you go. And he wanted the family, the gathering around the meal, to be, in no way to communicate aggression. Chopsticks reflect gentleness and benevolence, goodness, right? They also associated with certain superstitions. Now, and Lana, I don't know how many of these are true in Japan. You can correct me here, or this is what I gathered. If chopsticks are uneven, you may miss a boat, plane, or a train. Do people in Japan is it a big deal to make sure they're even, the same length, or doesn't that really matter? When they come together, do they have to be even, or can they be off a little bit? Do they consider it bad luck for the chopsticks to be uneven at the ends? Or is that not an issue? Yeah, in other words, just take these, sorry. Some people, apparently in some places, there's the idea that if they're not even, if one's longer than the other, then it's bad luck. Sorry. Mm-hmm. Yes. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yes. Okay. And remember, Confucianism wasn't as big a deal in Japan as it was in China. So some of these things would apply more to a Chinese culture than a Japanese culture, I think. That's part of what's happening here. Okay? So don't just make sure that dropping them brings bad luck. Now, if you're a tourist, you can hear chopsticks dropping all over the place because we're just trying to make them work. We would say if you drop them, replace them because they get dirty, but crossing them means we're done. Now, is that true if you cross chopsticks in Japan? Is that a way of saying I'm finished eating or not? No. Nope. So again, this is more Chinese than Japanese. Yeah, we need Sharon here to help us with some of this maybe. Passing them from one to another is taboo, okay? Now, when it comes to health, I know that I think in Japan where sometimes you use the back side to grab something out of a dish so that you're not using the side that you put in your mouth. And that's just a nice health thing. Yep, you can turn them back. I've seen people do that. I don't think I can do that either. I don't know. My wife is fine with them. She's been to Japan a couple times less than I have. Well, at least one time less than I have. And she picked it up just fine. So I don't know what's going on. I'm probably that way with American utensils too and just don't realize it. All right, what did I do with my utensil? All right, so just some fun things. And we got some beautiful chopsticks from Japan. You can go, they have stores that walls are just lined with them. I mean, just all sorts of choices. We have several of them at home. So when we have company over, if we want to do something Asian, then we'll put those out. All right, to Westerners, Confucianism seems about as relevant as fortune cookies, which aren't found in Asia. Somebody told me, I don't know if I can prove this, but the only place on the earth where you find fortune cookies is the United States. Never seen them in Japan. No, it's marketing. Yep. So, Confucianism just isn't nearly as well known. By the way, let's be honest. How many of you have opened your fortune cookie and read it and wondered if maybe there's something there for you? You won't admit it if you did. Most of the stuff is generic enough that you could make it fit somehow. Not much is known about the personal life of Confucius. One of the things we study in non-Christian religions is that in certain religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, the historical element of the religion is really not that important. It's not that there is no history or they don't know anything about it, but they don't consider it as important. For instance, Christianity, we are very, very, very serious about understanding the history, not only of Christianity, but of the Old Testament, and history of the world. Very important in the West. But in a lot of Eastern religions, it's not so much the historical background as it is the meaning of what they do, the ritual itself. Now, we do that some here. I mean, you've all heard the story of Washington chopping down the cherry tree, right? Well, the fact is we really don't know if he ever did that, okay? But it's okay because we tell the story anyway. Why? If you're not sure that he actually did it, why tell the story? Yes. It becomes kind of a theme of American life. We like the idea that he was honest about what he did. And so for us, it doesn't really matter so much whether he actually did it. That happens much more broadly in most Eastern religions. Did it happen? Did Buddha really live? And if he did, what was his life really like? Well, it doesn't matter that much. It's what he represents, what we learn from the story. So that's something important to keep in mind in the South, in the Confucian Asian culture. Which means if you're really big on teaching the history of the Bible, you might want to be careful. I mean, you want to teach it, but also make sure you balance your teaching with the spiritual and ethical and moral implications of the story, okay? Don't spend so much time proving the details of the history of it that you lose your listeners. Make sure you balance that. All right, let's make a few observations about Confucianism. It's called the religion of Li, okay? Anybody here know any Chinese at all? All right. Yeah, she might. Well, it's not so much a religion as a philosophy. We've already made that observation. But I still include it, and a couple of key textbooks I have do include it as well. It includes three main concepts. So you have Li, L-I, which is a word that means arrange in order. It has to do with etiquette, civility, propriety, protocol, body language, dress. It's the standard for how you do things. That's Li. And then there's, under that, Japan practices a tighter Confucianism than China. I don't know, do you use this word, the word Li? Is that used at all in Japanese culture to refer to the way you do things or not? Okay. All right. And that's fine. Yeah, Japanese, the language is fascinating because you have Chinese characters in the Japanese language, and you also have, what do you call the Japanese alphabet in English? What would we call that? No, because you have Japanese letters, and then you have Chinese letter, right? Yeah, and so there's a mixture, right, among, it's fascinating. It's really, really interesting. Okay, anyway, as an example, Chinese may belch loudly. Now, I say that, you feel awkward just hearing me say that, right? And that's also true in some Arab countries. If you eat and you enjoy the meal, you belch. And that means I love it. It was good. Okay, if you've watched Ben-Hur, there's a scene in the 59 Ben-Hur where he's eating at the sheik's house, and the sheik is a little bit frustrated because he's not manifesting his appreciation for the meal. And so he finally gets the message and he belches, and he forces a belch. And the sheik, I'm glad you like the food. I think the sheik actually asked him, says, was the food not to your liking? He said, no, it was really good. And his friends over there trying to get him to, and he finally belches. Don't do that here. Ye, righteousness. Okay, that's the second concept, righteousness, performing the custom correctly. So li is the custom itself, the protocol. What do you do? Ye tells you how to perform it correctly. So you see, Confucianism is really big on propriety in life, doing things correctly, because they believe that brings social harmony and unity in the community. And then Ren is the third one, and Ren is inner harmony and peace of mind that you feel when you have followed the custom correctly. Social harmony is, in other words, when you know what to do, li, and you do it correctly, yi, then there's this inner peace, this inner feeling of I'm helping promote harmony in society. And what's interesting, and you can see parallels with Christianity here, right? I mean, does Christianity have a code of conduct per se? Yeah, it does. Certain things we are expected to do, right? And we're expected to do things correctly, all right? We're not just told to worship, but we're given guidelines for how to worship God, how to pray. Jesus told his disciples how to pray, gave them some structure. And then there is an inner peace also for the believer. When we know that we're honoring God, we're obeying him, we're doing what he wants to in a way that is appropriate, we also enjoy peace and contentment in having done that. So, this is not something that Confucianism invented. This is something that God wired in man that Confucianism has misapplied. Because Confucianism does it for the sake of social harmony. Christianity does it for the sake of bringing honor to our God. A whole different motivation behind it. Okay? So one of the things that somebody ministering in a Confucian Asian country can do is acknowledge the value of li and ren, but then help them to apply it. Kind of like the Apostle Paul on Mars Hill says, your pagan poets say that we are God's offspring. Well, you have a point there, but let me show you the God whose offspring we truly are. And that's what Paul attempts to do in Acts 17. Okay? Interesting. All right. Now, I don't know who this is just a stock photo, okay? I have no idea who this family is. Now, Lana, I will confess to you that I have a really hard time sometimes distinguishing between different ethnicities in Asia. There's many, many, many ethnicities. I have a very hard time. I suppose that probably even that's true even in the West. In other words, how many times do you have trouble telling the difference between a German and a French person, or an Italian, or a Britisher? We have that issue even in the Western world. So I'm guessing that that's a Chinese family, but I don't know. Can you tell by looking if that would be a Chinese family or Japanese or? Okay. Yeah. And I appreciate that, because even those who live in the East sometimes maybe have trouble also identifying specific ethnicities. That's encouraging to those of us who live in the West. Yes. All right. So, letter A, father to son. All right, these are 5 key relationships. Of course, if social harmony is the ultimate, then relationships, of course, are indispensable, very important. Father to son, this is the one that governs all other relationships. Now, in the West, what relationship is considered the most foundational? Husband and wife, right? Which is based upon the created order. God created Adam and Eve, and every other relationship is founded on that one. But in Confucianism, at least, the father-son relationship is the most important. And Lana, I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep picking on you, but you're very helpful here. In Japan, is the father-son relationship, equal to the husband-wife, or is it higher in the Japanese society? Or is the husband-wife relationship the most important one? Sorry to put you on the spot, but the son does. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. That's very helpful. No, it's very, very helpful. There's definitely a greater weight of responsibility on the firstborn son. Whereas, in the Western culture, we don't think in those terms. When it comes to, for instance, when the parents die, who gets the whatever they left behind? We usually it's divided up evenly, And a lot of times it's not so much the oldest or eldest son as it is the son that seems to be the most responsible, that has the best chance of organizing the things that belong to the parents. It's much more practical in the West than it is relational, if that makes sense. Yeah. And again, we're talking Confucianism here, but I appreciate your insights, and I should give you a little extra credit for all the teaching you're doing here today. B, elder brother to younger brother is the second relationship in the Confucian culture that's very important, because it's an extension of the father's care. When the elder brother takes care of these siblings, he's acting almost like a steward of his father, extending his father's responsibility. And then the husband to wife actually comes after that. Interesting. Husband and wife relationship is important in the Confucian culture, and so that's something else to remember. If you're ministering in a culture like that, you tend to come in and immediately talk about the husband and wife, because the Bible does, but be aware of this and don't forget to emphasize the importance of the father-son and sibling relationship, because the Bible does address that as well. All right, and then D, the next one, ruler to subject. Now, okay, this is where China becomes very interesting, because you say, wait a minute, in China, are you telling me that the ruler to subject is fourth in line? You got to be kidding me. Well, understand that communism in China is not necessarily innate to the Chinese culture. Just because China is communist doesn't mean that that is part of the embedded foundational culture of China, okay? So that's something political systems don't always reflect the root, ingredients in a culture. Sometimes they actually redefine certain things and make changes to those things. So keep that in mind. And then E, the elder to junior in general. And this is true in Asia, I think, in general. In other words, older people should be treated with a special respect, no matter what the relationship is. And that is not nearly as true in the Western world. All right. Well, Li, Yi, and Ren are learned through education. Education is very important. And These are things that are taught in the educational world, in both family and in school, familial and formal education. All right. Number 8, you change society by changing the individual for the benefit of family and community. Now that, you say that sounds really individualistic, but it's not. Okay, why are you changing the individual for the benefit of the family and community? Not so that that child can become what he or she wants to, but so that he or she fits in to society. That's the difference. So just because you see emphasis on the individual doesn't mean it's individualistic. It's kind of like that. Remember that illustration in the Bible of the 99 sheep and the one sheep? Why the emphasis on the one sheep was because it was an individualistic culture? No, because that one sheep was not part of and in harmony with the fold. All right. All righty. So why do Chinese businessmen insist on getting their visitors drunk? We've talked about this before. This may not be true in every case, but in general, why do you take your subordinates at work with you out and get them drunk in China? Okay, it does relieve stress. Absolutely. That is true. What else? Okay, it does tend to break down, differences in the group. It kind of bonds the group together, and it also bonds the group with the leader. That's not low power distance. It's really more they open up more to him. He's still very much the leader, but getting him drunk kind of breaks down barriers that keep him from being able to influence them. Okay? In general, it's much easier to influence people who are under the influence of alcohol than if they're not, especially if they're strong-willed. So it's not viewed as a degrading thing. It's viewed as something that will bring about harmony in the workplace. Yeah. I'm trying to figure where that music's coming from. Maybe somebody's playing over here. I like some background music. That's kind of neat. A, it is viewed as a way of solidifying a business relationship. This is the whole point of the dinner engagement, solidifying a business relationship. And, well, look at this. Chinese wine, 40 to 60% alcohol. Now, look, we just heard a message in chapel about it. Has anybody done any research on the average alcohol content in wine that you buy at the store here? I have not. I really don't have any idea. And maybe it varies a lot from wine brand to brand. Okay? I just don't make it a point to stop and check the label out when I'm there, Okay, but think about it, 40 to 60%. Well, what percentage of alcohol is NyQuil? I was going to ask you if you've ever had NyQuil. I've heard NyQuil is 20% alcohol. There's a lot of alcohol. NyQuil is made to take at night. That's one of the reasons you take it at night, I guess. Anyway, that's a huge percentage of alcohol, 40 to 60%. Wine or beer? Wine? Because normally wine is a higher content of alcohol than most beers. Okay. 15 to 20%, somewhere in there, maybe. Yeah, depending. So look at this. That's like 4 times as much. Woohoo! Yeah. In the Greek world, if the alcohol content was 30%, it was considered a demonic potion. The Greeks, they drank a lot of alcohol, but even 30%, which is less than this, was considered to be, messing with the demonic world, the spirit world. Yeah. You've heard of wine and spirits, right? That's kind of where that comes from. Oftentimes wine was used, parallel to this in the Greek world, wine was often used to release the spirit world to the person. It would open you up to the spirit world, okay, which is scary. And that's, I think on the day of Pentecost, that's actually what some of them might have been insinuating. These men are full of new wine. The reason they're speaking in tongues is because demons are controlling them. They've opened themselves up to demonic activity with the use of wine. So I don't know if that's at least one possibility for interpreting that passage. C, Confucius made an exception to wine, permitting unlimited consumption. No wonder Confucianism is so popular, right? But again, he wanted to break down the barriers. He wanted social harmony, and so it shouldn't surprise us that he would promote the consumption of alcohol. Drinking together deepens friendships. You've heard people talk about drinking buddies, right? And usually when you hear somebody talk about drinking buddies, it's probably not a very good, you end up some weird things going on. And interesting, this comes up after today's message in chapel. By the way, I really appreciated Kurt's comment. I thought he did a really, really good job. E, if you refuse to get drunk, you'll have to work harder to build a relationship. So you're a Christian working in a culture like this where drinking is expected, and you say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to participate because I'm a Christian. They're not necessarily going to fire you. Say, fine, you're fired, but you might find that when the promotions come, you're left out. When the raises come, you don't get one. Yeah. You mean like in the workplace? Yeah, they would be there are probably any number of means of developing social harmony. This is one that's done, but it has a reputation of being popular in the workplace. But any kind of, festival occasions, things like that can draw communities together. I remember in Japan, we went to fireworks celebration. It was amazing. I don't remember if you were there that year or not, but and it just huge. And it was probably commemorating one of the gods. I don't know for sure, but and so that type of thing was considered, kind of thing that bonds people together. We even sense that a little bit here in our country when it comes to patriotic holidays, for example. It kind of binds us all together as patriots of our country. So I would say there are probably any number of things like that can affect that. And as a Christian, if you're preaching the gospel or starting a church there, obviously you go to the Word of God and you find ways and means of bringing the people of God together. Church activities, even eating. Eating is one of those things that almost internationally is recognized as a bonding thing. Just is. Something about sharing a meal together. I think that's part of it. I think part of it is that you're all eating from the same dishes. You go to a restaurant, I realize that's a little different. You can order different things off the menu, but you're still together at the same restaurant. So I don't know. But there's something about food when you're sharing a feast together that, I'm sorry, you guys. I actually am having lunch at Olive Garden today with an old friend of mine from way back when I was in Washington State. Yeah, so I'm getting hungry. All right. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but yeah. What culture values best explain Confucianist cultures? All right, here we go. Collectivism, big deal. I mean, it shouldn't surprise you. This is the highest ranking cluster in the world. Lots of collectivism. Decisions are based on what is best for the in-group. Remember we talked about the in-group back when the family is the most intimate of all in-groups, and then you have others. All right? Give me an example of an in-group you have here. Are you involved in an in-group here? Yep. Can be your sports team. What else? Yeah. Your RAs, and maybe your floor or your suite. What else? Correct. Yeah. Yep. Corral, uplift. Why do you guys always sit together? Because you sing together, right? No. Yeah. Even your class, you have class chapels. You know, there's sometimes that may be a little looser, but everybody has in groups. But they're especially meaningful in a collectivistic society, and yeah. This relates to the Chinese concept of guanxi. I'm probably killing the word. Guanxi means connections, and it's based on trust, mutual obligations, and especially shared experiences. Yeah, very important. But you think about it, this isn't just collectivistic cultures. God created man to be a unity, to be a society, okay? Man abused that at Babel by saying, we're not going to scatter, we're going to all stay right here. That's an abuse of what God created. But God did intend for people to live together in harmony. So these things aren't totally foreign to even our way of thinking. A relationship with no strings attached is no relationship at all. We've shown some videos of David Livermore. He went to an Asian country, a Confucian Asian country once. I don't remember if it was China. I think it was China. And he was invited to a big banquet. And the guy that invited him, I mean, it was over the top. It was just the best of everything. The guy he had a decent amount of money, and I mean, they just served him the best. And during the meal, then, the host sat down with the visitor, and this visitor happened to be a medical doctor, okay? And the host knew that. And he sat down with him. He said, I have a son that would like to study medicine. Of course, you know, it's very important in an Asian culture for the son to get a good job so that he can support his family. And so he sat down, he said, you're a medical doctor. Could you pull some strings to help my son get into medical school? See, and the doctor said, and he said this totally innocently, he was just being very honest. He said, you know, I'm really glad that your son's interested in medical school, but unfortunately, in my country, we can't do that. They have to go through the process of application and all that, just like anybody else does. He was just being very honest with the guy, trying to help him understand that, you know, we can't do political tricks, or just because I'm a doctor doesn't give me a right to get somebody in. Now, does that happen in some schools? I'm sure it does. The Ivy League schools, you know, so you know. But that was what, and the doctor did not realize it, but this greatly offended the man. And he began to notice after the banquet, the man would never reveal his feelings during the banquet, you know, but afterwards, the doctor began noticing that it was harder and harder to get federal funding for medical projects and things that he wanted to do. And the reason was because he had offended this man. He had, in the eyes of this host, he had refused his responsibility to help him when he had the means to do so. And you say, well, that's not fair. Well, maybe it's not from where we sit, but from where that guy sits, because I'm a doctor, I should have the means to help his son get into school. You see? So that's something else to keep in mind. And that could be a very delicate situation, okay? So anyway, interesting. Strong commitment to cultural purity. People here are slow to welcome outsiders. Now, we've seen that in the Central Asian culture, remember? Central Europe, Eastern European, Central Asian culture, excuse me. The same thing. Cultural purity means it's harder to let outsiders in. We don't want to mess up the unity of our people group. You guys, now this is a totally different cultural context, but you guys remember the story of Jim Elliot. This is South America, but this particular principle applies even there. Why were Jim Elliot and his friends killed? Because they posed a threat to the leaders there, not personally, but because there was a tribal conviction, not just among this tribe, but other tribes in that area, in Ecuador and South America, a tribal conviction that any entrance of other cultures or ethnicities poses a threat to the stability and peace and harmony of our tribe. So it didn't matter that they were dropping gifts and that they were, trying to establish rapport with them. All of that was good, but none of that changed the fact that they were outsiders. So when they landed, they were eventually killed. And so that happens in a variety of places. And it's important to keep that in mind. Even if you're doing things, acts of kindness and things that you think might be bonding you to the people, it may not be that easy. And you just need to keep that in mind. All right? Letter B, long-term time orientation. China is one of the oldest cultures in the world. Japan, also a very old culture. Lana, I don't know. Do you know how old Japan as a country is? Do you? Yeah. Yeah. But it would be comparable, at least, to China. Yeah, very, very ancient culture. Yeah, and remember that the older a culture is, the more long-term it tends to be. We're a very young culture. We're 240, what are we now? Where are we at on the count as a United States? 240-something. And so we're a very, very youthful country. And you see that reflected even in our short-term way of planning. Okay, short-term benefits are often sacrificed for the long-term benefits. In our country, we think, got to snatch the opportunity now, strike while the iron's hot. We have all kinds of statements that we use to say, short-term, we got to do it now. My wife and I are looking at plane tickets, man, and they go up and they down. So when they get down, grab it now, man. We're trying to buy tickets to Brazil, and the day before yesterday, they were $300 less than they were yesterday. They went up $300 in one day. So we decided we're going to wait and see if they go back down again, keep our eye on it. Just short term. People are less likely to spend money they don't have. Boy, that's the opposite in our country. We are encouraged to spend money we don't have. It's called a credit card. People are less likely to spend money they don't have. C, high context. Norms of communication are more prescribed here than in other places. Neutral. And Lana, I don't know if you're aware of that, but Japan is considered to be the most neutral culture in all the world, emotionally. Now, in the tourist world, they're very expressive because they know that most tourism comes from the West. So they've been taught to be very expressive, but as a general rule in the culture, they're very much more neutral in their expression. Is that a fair statement, Lana? Am I being correct? It takes a little longer, a lot more to develop a relationship and stuff like that. German, of course, we talked about the German culture also being very neutral, but Japan is reputed as the most neutral. Number 11, there are significant differences among countries in the Confucian cluster. So again, this is just a reminder that just because we're talking about a cluster doesn't mean that all these countries are alike. They are not. If I told Lana that Japanese are just like Chinese, you'd look at me funny like, no, they're not. North Koreans, very different from Japanese, right? South Koreans, even North and South Koreans can be very different from one another. Historical conflict and prejudice has something to do with that. I mean, you look at North and South Korea, for example, that are part of this cluster. Well, the politics in that have just had such an impact, especially since the close of World War II and the Korean War 1950, that has changed a lot. Difference in values in different countries. We've talked about this before, but it's an interesting study why the gospel, when missionaries went to Japan, they had a lot more difficulty getting the gospel into the country than people in Korea. And this is before the split between North and South Korea. When missionaries went to Korea, they found there was a greater openness. And one of the reasons, well, do you remember? I think we talked about this. Does anybody happen to remember the reason we gave why it was harder for the gospel to penetrate Japan than it was Korea? There was one main reason we gave for that. It has to do with the main religion in the country. Japan was already very steeped in Shinto and Buddhism to some extent, whereas Korea did not have a major religion. There were Buddhists, in Korea and Confucianists, but there wasn't the embedded major religion there that there was in other places, and they seemed to be more open for that reason. But Japan is a doing culture, but China is a being culture. Now that, again, is an oversimplification, I'm sure. China has been very influenced in recent decades by the West, by globalization, and so it's not nearly as much of a being culture as it used to be. And one of the reasons that Japan has become more of a doing culture is because of its interaction with the Western world. I mean, just look at the production of cars and technology, Samsung, you start naming Japanese companies. So there has been a lot of influence from the West, especially since World War II, in making Japan a very much a doing culture, at least. I remember one of my friends who've been to Japan several times saying, Japan has a unique ability to be both a doing and a being culture at the same time. When it comes to the industry of cars and technology, they can transition into a doing lifestyle, but there's still a lot of the being mentality deeply rooted in the Japanese culture. A unique ability to make that transition as needed. Japan is more universalist, while China is more particularist when it comes to laws and rules. Part of that is because Japan is an island nation, as Lana said earlier. And so there's a lot less geography to deal with, whereas in China, it's so vast, geographically, that it's harder for universalist laws to be enforced. Just makes sense. And you look at even the United States right now. I mean, red and blue states, you hear about that. The redder states tend to become redder and the bluer become bluer. And it's very interesting to think about how this is all going to land in the next 10, 15, 50 years. Particularism in the States, we've always been more of a universalist culture. But the way things are going politically and with the moral revolution, you're seeing a division, a big chasm taking place in our country that is changing that to some degree. I won't be here long enough to see the long-term effects, but you might. Uncertainty avoidance is much higher in Singapore and Japan than it is in China. Again, that might have something to do with the geography as well. Singapore sometimes fits better with the South Asian cluster and even has affinity with the Anglo cluster. Now, the reason that Singapore has some affinity with the Anglo culture is mostly because of economic interaction with the West. Singapore is extremely rich, and there's a lot of economic interaction which brings it into contact with the Anglo cluster more than some other countries are. Now, speaking of economics, Japan is very strong. I mean, the yen in Japan is usually stronger than the dollar. I haven't kept track of it lately, but the yen yen, right? Is often, yeah. is often stronger than the dollar. But again, it's been a long time since I've compared them. I haven't been there for a while. I don't know. Do you know what the exchange rate is between the yen and the dollar right now? Mm-hmm. And it is very complicated. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's all in flux. It changes all the time. Yeah. Good. All right. So do's and don'ts in the Confucian Asian culture, just to whet your appetite again. Looks really yummy. Do pay more attention to manners and etiquette. Important to keep in mind. Manners and etiquette. A lot of our lack of etiquette does come from the pioneer days. You ever watched Old Yeller? Remember the old, who's that guy that comes for dinner? You know, he's a boisterous guy, comes to visit him. He doesn't have very many manners. And he sits down at the table and he eats, and when he's all done, he just takes his hands and wipes them on the tablecloth and then gets up and leaves. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen it. But some say that one of the reasons why we're more relaxed with our etiquette at the table is because of the pioneer spirit, you know, and much more relaxed that way. I don't know. Do eat with chopsticks if possible. And I notice the if possible. That gives me an escape. And if you're drinking soup, you can drink it and slurp, right? It's okay. See, I get bawled out for slurping when I was a kid, you know. You don't pick up the bowl, you use the spoon. You know? That's one thing I really like about it. Do promote harmony. And look, the scriptures are full of harmony. God wanted his people to be harmonious. And that's just been a hallmark of God's people. You can emphasize that with, you know, the real clue, the key to true social harmony is to be in harmony with the Creator. If we're in harmony with the Creator, we'll be in harmony with one another. That is the real message we have to share. Don't completely empty your plate. What happens in this culture if you completely empty your plate? Yeah, they think you want more. That happened in Brazil too, by the way. I'd eat and say, no, when you're done, just leave a little bit on your plate and then put the utensils down. That will communicate to them that you're done. Yeah. And avoid words like I'm stuffed. You don't want to say that because that's negative. Or I'm so full. Or I ate too much. You don't want to say things like that. You say, in Portuguese, I don't know about Peru and Chile, we say, I'm satisfied. Tô satisfeito. Now, do you say something like that? And how do you say you're full when you're done? Okay. But to be polite, you'd probably say something different, huh? Okay. Okay. And in Japan, if you're done eating, do you leave a little bit on the plate too? Is that a custom in Japan? No? So you can eat it all and, okay. Yeah. Again, this is more Confucianist than anything else. All right. Well, not only did we empty our plate, but we emptied our notes. So I think we're good to go till Tuesday. South Asian cultures on Tuesday. Thank you very much.